Sure, Prof.
And where is the just a moment.
Let me start first, Prof. Then
Right.
we can because it's time to start the session on time. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihil kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin amma ba'd. Honorable Dr. Associate Professor Dr. Mohammad Umar Farooq, our guest speaker today, distinguished guest, lecturers, professionals, students, my dear brothers and sisters, would like to welcome you all to this session entitled Post-Pandemic Economy, Challenges and Opportunities. Islamic Economics Association of the Sharia Faculty of Kuwait University is glad to welcome you all to our activities and events, weekly and monthly. As you know, the association is trying to promote Sharia compliant standards and strategies, models through arranging and hosting events, programs, seminars, and talks. So a part of that, today's event will be conducted by Prof. Mohammad Umar Farooq, inshallah. So before I leave the session to Prof. Umar Farooq, let me introduce Prof. Briefly. Dr. Mohammad Umar Farooq is an Associate Professor of Economics and Finance with the Department of Accounting and Finance at Gulf University, Bahrain. Prof received his PhD in economics from University of Tennessee, USA in 1988. And he was a postdoctoral research fellow at University of California. He has taught at several US universities for 20 years and then in Bahrain for 13 years. His teaching and research cover both conventional and Islamic economics and finance. He also has scholarly contributions in the field of Islamic law and history. Inspired by Islam, he consistently writes from a self-critical, common ground-seeking, bridge-building, humanity-oriented perspective. This is our honor today to have Associate Professor Dr. Mohammad Umar Farooq to conduct and to lecture on post-pandemic economy, challenges and opportunities. On behalf of the Islamic Economics Association, Kuwait University, it's our honor to welcome Dr. Umar Farooq to deliver his lecture.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I hope you can hear me, Mahi.
Yes, Prof. Yes.
Okay. Let me take this opportunity to express my gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving me this opportunity to be with you all. And also, I thank the invitation on behalf of the Kuwait Islamic Economics Association and Dr. Mahi facilitating it. This is my second time I'm joining this forum on a webinar, and I look forward to further engagement, inshallah. Let me see if I can share the screen here. Can you see the screen?
Yes, Prof. It's clear.
Okay. All right. Let me first clarify that while we discuss these intellectual issues, just a disclaimer that this is my personal and professional view. It does not in any way reflect anyone else, including my employer, current or past. We are living in a very interesting time. 2 years ago, when the pandemic started and the way it unfolded, it felt like that this might be the beginning of the end. But Alhamdulillah, we are recovering. Globally speaking, although the pace of recovery and the nature of recovery still remains precarious, but progress has been made, and it is our hope and prayer that hopefully we can return to some degree of normalcy within a reasonable period of time or in near future. All of us who are well, we are blessed. May Allah keep us well, and also all those souls who have departed or who have been affected, our prayer is with them, and hopefully everything will become better, inshallah. Now, uh, while this particular topic is in the context of the Muslim world, but the issues that we will be discussing actually it affects the rest of the world as well. So the theme, in some way, when we talk in the context of humanity, many of the issues are not really much different the way it affects us collectively. Now, the presentation I want to make, I want to put it in the context of a very influential book. Many of you might already be familiar with, many of you may have already read it, but I just want to contextualize this discussion in the framework of that book. Probably you have come across the name of the book and the theme also, The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Apparently, in 2007, Sunday Times regarded as one of the 12 most influential books since World War II. If you have not read it, I welcome or invite you to read it. I found the book quite fascinating, enlightening, and thought-provoking. It challenges us to think about things in an out-of-box manner, and I think it is important that we do so. When we talk about Black Swan, let me first clarify that the idea here of Black Swan is that swans are usually with white feather, and nobody actually has seen a black swan. Idea is that, of course, if one black swan can be found, then of course there would be some existence of a black swan proven and demonstrated. But essential idea behind, someone raised a hand. Any issue, Mr. Zakaria? Maybe later on after we make the presentation, unless there is
Yes,
an
Prof.
issue
I
right
think
now.
we can entertain maybe later.
Okay, all right. So this idea of black swan in the context of what we are discussing is that these are extremely rare event, almost non-existent. It is with very extreme impact. And also the way we usually treat it is that after it happens, we try to rationalize it and try to think it in a retrospective manner. And that is one of the essence of our approach toward black swan. That's first of all, we live from crisis to crisis. And after one crisis occurs, we basically tend to forget about it not too long after the crisis has occurred. And as things return to some degree of normalcy and the impact of crisis is somewhat managed, we think that that was just a rare event and it's not going to occur again. And we often see that many of the crises that actually occur recurrently, but we really have not done much better over time in dealing with these crises. So in a way, our blindness or lack of preparation with respect to randomness, particularly with large deviations, of course, would mean very high impact. And this kind of blindness is what causes us to persist in not learning from the past. Even forget about pandemic, many of the crises that we see in the economic and financial arena, it is not unpredictable anymore. There are sufficient studies that have been done that can somehow forecast or predict that things are likely to happen in near future or in distant future. The causes or the factors are there, but we keep doing business as usual. And then, of course, we find that these crises occur rather repeatedly or recurrently. The idea behind this work is not to attempt to predict black swan events, because that's very difficult to predict, especially if it is so extreme or rare. But according to the author of this book, that it is to build robustness to negative events and ability to exploit positive events. So in a way, his invitation is that there are things to learn from the events of the past, and there are things that we can do, not to treat things as if that they are non-existent or such an outlier that we just don't need to think about it. There are positive and constructive ways to think about it. And if there is one enduring lesson from this pandemic, then probably this would be that we should not think this kind of thing as impossibility or like a black swan. So if we go back a little bit further before this pandemic, there was a crisis of a different kind, but more common, an economic or financial crisis. And that crisis was not altogether unpredictable. And the reason they were not unpredictable is that in the previous crisis that the humanity has experienced, though concentrated maybe in different parts of the world or originated in different parts of the world, but some of the common factors we have seen are recurrent. So, for example, one of the key factors that have been always present or almost consistently present is the explosion of debt as part of debt culture. Debt has been throughout the history as part of our life, but we have increasingly become a part of what I dub as debt prone culture, debt seeking, debt promoting, debt creating culture. And the debt actually exploded both at the private level as well as a public level, to the extent that at some point in time it becomes unmanageable. Now, there might be different trigger points, but the fact remains that debt, excessive debt, remains a very big problem and a common factor. Deregulation combined with financialization and rent-seeking behavior. Deregulation actually is in the context of many Western countries that we go back and forth like a pendulum, that we have lots of regulations, and then there are some political changes, and then there is a wave of deregulation. And so far, every time the deregulation has occurred, not necessarily that every regulation or too much regulation is a good thing, but every time there has been a wave of deregulation, within a decade of time, usually there has been a major financial crisis.
Excuse me, Prof.
Yes.
Prof, could you please make it a little bit bigger, just a little bit bigger, or you can just play slideshow.
Okay. Maybe I can do it as presenter. I don't know if this would work. How about this?
Yeah, I think that's better. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Yeah, I think that probably where some of the participants were drawing attention. But it was not specific enough. Anyway, so the last crisis that we saw, there was something more prominent, something that we have not seen before, was financialization. It is not that financialization is something new, but the level of financialization is such that the real economy, as compared with the monetized economy, is basically getting shrunk. And overwhelmingly, it is the financial sector that dominates the economy. And as a result of that, there is a big delink or a kind of disconnect between the real economy and the financial sector. And combined with that, rent-seeking behavior, where there is a tendency to earn wealth or accumulate wealth without actually contributing something of value to the economy. And by the way, these are things that If you are not familiar with, I invite you to learn further as a topic to help us better understand the global political economy of our time. Then there was the esoteric financial engineering, especially in terms of the derivatives and many other exotic financial products that even many of the top people in those financial firms admit that they did not quite fully understand, but it was profitable enough or lucrative enough that they pursued it. What would be the impact on the economy or society? That was not really a big concern as long as they could reap a heavy reward for themselves. There were reckless public policies that promote moral hazard, including in any kind of society where some of the institutions are, secured in such a way that if they fail, the government steps in to bail them out, then it creates a moral hazard. And many of the big financial institutions, particularly the global financial institutions, basically they were behaving very irresponsibly in such kind of moral hazard promoting environment. And then also too much power and lack of accountability on the part of the rich and powerful, which also is not just a financial and economic crisis, it is more of an ethical crisis. And we saw that the way the industrial powers have been utilizing energy and the way they were unconcerned about the climate change and so on. Altogether, the rich part of the world and the rich people as part of the global community, they have not been really behaving or conducting themselves very responsibly. So these are things that in the past we have seen in some combination contribute toward some kind of crisis, but crisis to crisis, if we study, we really have not learned much to change our behavior. There are some tweaking of policies, there are tweaking of some institutions, but fundamentally our behavior has not changed, which is very important to realize. By the way, just to invite you to reading resources, because we're talking about the debt, although it is written in the context of Islamic finance, but you might find it of broader relevance. This was published in International Journal of Social Economics. And another one, as I mentioned about the rent-seeking behavior, that both of these actually are not too old. When you have time, you might like to read further about these topics that I am drawing your attention to. Let us now talk about this pandemic and the black swan. Black swan is rare, almost non-existent the way we think. But in some ways, this pandemic crisis also shares some similarities with many other crises that we had before. And four of these that we can identify, that there could be natural disaster or hazard, there could be war, there could be macroeconomic mismanagement, and of course, international financial meltdown. These are things either can trigger crisis or somehow related to the crisis in such a way that as the crisis unfolds, one or more of these become key factors. Now, interestingly, although each of the crises has its own characteristics, but this pandemic-led crisis combines some of the worst features of all the crises. So if we simply look at the crisis pattern and the way different factors actually play a role, let's take a look at this table here. And you will see that there are four categories we look at: mechanism, scope, duration, and certainty. And within mechanism, it could be both supply and demand led, or it could be one or the other. From a scope, it could be regional, domestic, or it could be global, global scope. The duration could be short or long. Certainty could be, as far as impact is concerned and how things are going to unfold, uncertain to very uncertain. So there are different ways each of the crises can be categorized. Based on this particular categorization by a World Bank group, what we find is that almost every aspect of categorization that is from bad to worse, it is the worst part that we saw in terms of this pandemic. So when it comes to pandemic, we see mechanism-wise both demand and supply factor, not just one. In terms of scope, it is not just domestic or regional, it is actually global. Impact is not short, actually, it is of long duration. And how things are going to pan out, we still are very uncertain about it, although we are on the path of recovery or so it seems. If you look at some of the other crises, some of them either supply or demand led, some of them are only probably limited to domestic or regional scope, some of them are only to the short run, some of them are certain but not very uncertain. But if we see pandemic, the way the things unfolded and is still unfolding, it seems that it presents one of the worst that we have experienced so far in terms of crisis. What that tells us is that we need to prepare ourselves that this is probably not the last black swan like pandemic led crisis, but similar things can happen again now that we have seen such a pandemic led crisis. We are familiar with war induced crisis, financial crisis, or other kinds of crisis, but health sector side that can engulf us globally, this is something that at least not in recent memory, we have not seen something like that, although there have been breakout of some kind of epidemic here and there with some global import, but nothing of the scale that we saw in this pandemic. So the kind of things that we usually understand about crisis from political side, from economic side, somehow this pandemic was completely unforeseen. We have not prepared ourselves at all to have such kind of pandemic affecting globally. And basically, all the kind of resources that we spend, and both rich countries and poor countries or not so rich countries, the way we allocate our resources to deal with different kinds of risk, different kind of problems, it seems that this particular crisis came from somewhere that we have not spent a lot of money on, and we were not thinking that we are going to be attacked or hurt from this angle. So trillions of dollars are spent on different things. We start wars, we have different kinds of spending to prevent the outcome of things like terrorism. We spend billions and billions, and globally speaking, trillions of dollars on weaponry of advanced defense products, and or actually they should be called war products. But we can see that it doesn't matter how powerful we are, even as a country as military power. Basically, a small thing like a virus that we saw today, coronavirus, it basically overpowered everybody. And those of us who have not learned the lesson, we don't know when we are going to learn the lesson, but it actually brings out some very important lessons that would help us, not only just in terms of short-term recovery, but if we learn any lesson, hopefully it will be more enduring for the long run. Another thing that we saw is that in some way, this pandemic can be viewed as an equalizer in the sense that it did not treat anybody, rich or poor, somewhat discriminatingly. There have been powerful people, there have been powerful countries, they have been actually more affected in some cases than poor countries. But it is also important that there have been consequences of this pandemic that is not an equalizer. There have been people who have been affected globally and nationally, particularly in terms of the inequality and so on. It has worsened. And we have also seen that even though we did come to experience that the virus does not discriminate anybody if we want to make ourselves vulnerable, but in terms of the impact, in terms of the recovery effort, it does make a difference. Those who are rich and those who are poor, those who are advanced and those who are not, those who are vaccine producers and those who are not, there is a significant difference there. As a result of that, as you know, that one of the things that we regularly talk about in the last couple of decades is the Sustainable Development Goals. We have been trying to improve things in such a way that we take care of our planet, we address the climate changes, we try to reverse things. We also want to address the kind of inequality, poverty, discrimination, exploitation, lack of education, and many other factors that actually have actually created a huge gap in different parts of the global population. Somehow we were making some progress. We were actually becoming more aware. We were engaging ourselves more in an organized manner. But it seems that this pandemic has caused a major setback. According to some estimates, that it may have actually put us at least 10 years back to catch up with what we have been doing. And as we all know, that although climate crisis actually is common to everybody, but there are other things that are also more immediate to people in terms of poverty, income opportunity, their sustenance and livelihood. For many parts of the world, people have lost jobs and they are not getting it back. It is not the same thing as in some rich countries where employers are struggling to find job seekers and employees, but in many other parts of the world, things have changed in a very fundamental way that people are having difficulty to come back and reclaim or start from where they left off. This is an interesting chart, according to Oxfam and ILO, that the inequality that we talk about that has been worsened by pandemic is that the people who are primarily living on their labor income, based on the 2020 data, they lost about $4 trillion. And how they are going to recover it of course is something for us to think about. During the same time, the people who are rich, a very small group of people, the billionaires in particular, they gained about $4 trillion. And this is something that is, even though transactionally it is not a zero-sum game, but if we look at the consequence, that obviously we have a very messed up political economy where it seems that the people can become richer, rich people can become richer, while poor people can become poorer. The mechanism we might have difficulty explaining and put our grip on, but definitely the impact is quite clear that we have scenarios where it is actually the poorer people who are taking the brunt of the crisis. They are dealing with it in a way disproportionately compared to the rich people, the rich countries, where it seems that as people suffer, other people can also make considerable amount of wealth at the expense of the others. So these are things that, of course, are lessons to be learned and to take note of, that these are things have to be addressed. But if we actually look at the lessons to be learned, one thing that we realize based on this pandemic, that we have our mutual interdependence at the human level. What does that mean? That basically means that this is not something we can ignore. If we are rich countries, that, well, poor countries, how do they deal with their situation? What is their health condition? What is their vulnerability? It actually should not be our concern. For a long time, whether it is pollution, whether it is the income earning capacity, whether it is the job opportunities, whether it is the education, whether the access to clean water or internet, it doesn't matter. The rich countries have, or the rich people have, an idea that, well, this is not our problem. As long as we take care of ourselves and things take care of us, let the other people take care of themselves. What we saw here is that somehow we live in a globally interconnected world where not only it is interconnected, but it is interdependent. And that is why many of the people who are claiming or suggesting actually that even in terms of vaccination, the way there are discriminatory practices and also the difference in terms of access to vaccine from the poorer countries compared to the richer countries, we probably are already ignoring the lesson that we are in this boat altogether. This is not something, a different boat that we can take care of our societies better and then we can reduce our vulnerability. Similarly, the fragility of our planet and its ecosystem. Scientifically, it has been established, although some people would like to argue otherwise, that our planet is increasingly become inhabitable. And that's not the way it is supposed to be. Especially those of us who live in the Muslim world and believe in Islam, we actually believe that we are trustees of this world, even though we have not taken this role seriously. But rest of the world, in many ways, have utilized this world, and we are part of that culture as well. That we just don't think that how our behavior or conduct, how our lifestyle, how our standard of living impact the generations to come, as well as the planet that we are living behind. Now, in the past, it could be argued that, well, we're not going to see anything drastically different within our generation. Why worry about what happens 100 years or 500 years or a millennium later? But the clock is ticking in such a way that it is catching up with our generations, with some dire predictions that even within 100 years or within a couple of centuries, the planet may become inhabitable altogether. And there are people already are planning that how can they escape this planet and go to some other planet for habitation. Now, rich people, of course, can afford to do that. For us, we don't know what is going to happen. But this kind of thing that also exposes that we need to take care of this planet in an interdependent manner, especially in an interconnected context. And also, our wealth and resources are grossly misallocated. Just consider how many wars that we have seen within the last 20, 30 years where the bill for such wars has crossed $1 trillion. It has devastated many countries. It has created a migration wave because people are dislocated. So just like when bees are pushed out of their hives, they go and swarm around the world and so on. We see that resources are being used in such a way that is more destructive, that is negative, and that actually is very destabilizing. Most of the people who have resources globally within their nation, both within the Western world and advanced developed countries, or within the Muslim majority countries, we see that there is tremendous misallocation of our resources and wealth. And even within each country, there is significant inequality, there are corruptions, there are rent-seeking behaviors that actually exposes a large portion of our population to vulnerable situations. Now, some of the anticipated things that we, of course, are already seeing, that the public health concerns will remain paramount even after the pandemic recovery occurs. We just don't know what is going to be the long-term impact. The negative external shock, exacerbated by other shocks, probably will linger for the foreseeable future and maybe beyond. Just to give some examples, there are people who may have recovered from corona, either without vaccine or with vaccine, but we are finding that there are health impact of the corona crisis just beyond recovery. Their immune system may have been compromised, their vulnerability to other flus and other kinds of viruses may have increased, and many of them have health conditions that have worsened as a result of this pandemic virus. So there are a lot of issues that we are going to have to probably deal with over a longer period of time. It also tells us that the pre-existing conditions matter in terms of type and speed of recovery. And by the way, when we talk about type and speed of recovery, it can be L-shaped, it could be W-shaped, like volatile, unpredictable, it could be V-shaped, like very quick, or U-shaped, somewhat gradual. which country, which part of the world is going to experience what kind of recovery, that again remains to be seen. We are seeing that some countries are better positioned because of their pre-existing conditions. Just think about that, particularly in our Muslim world, we are dependent on the rest of the world so much, especially on the wealthy, developed countries, advanced countries, that just like we did not come up with the virus, but when the virus came, we have been waiting and praying that when a vaccine will come and when we'll get our share, our capacity to deal with this problem somewhat more independently. We have not worked on develop our scientific and technological capability, including in the health sector, that is quite brazenly exposed. So if we look at the different possibilities of recovery, experts think that a quick recovery like V-shape is unlikely. Now, as long as we do not think recovery in terms of the stock markets, because global stock market is going through the roof, it has not only recovered, it has reached unprecedented heights, especially in terms of global stock market, financial market, including the US market, whether this is Dow Jones or NASDAQ or S&P 500. If those are taken as an indicator, then we are doing very well. But if we take in terms of restoration of the lost employments, people's lost income, in terms of health care and so on, schools that have lost years of education, and there are infrastructures that have been damaged, many other things actually. There are people who may have suffered irreparable or irreversible loss. We need to have better understanding over time. So one of the things that would be important for post-pandemic recovery for any economy would be building long-term resilience. That would be an imperative goal. How do we build that requires a more elaborate discussion, obviously from education to health to reducing inequality, taking care of our planet, our standard of living, our way of thinking that we are living in one planet but on different boats, ignoring our interdependence. All these things actually are not helpful to build that long-term resilience. Have we learned anything about this, and are we going to do things right? Well, that remains to be seen. However, as experienced from different countries, including GCCs, where the host as well as myself are engaged from, they have implemented a number of measures that actually is mitigating the economic damage. Fiscally, it has been very aggressive to take care of the crisis-related period, to provide income support, to provide universal vaccination. So many of these things, including relaxing some of the monetary restrictions or macroprudential rules, liquidity that has been injected, all these actually have helped in the short run, and this must be treated as recent signs of improvement. However, different countries have different kinds of challenges. We know the countries that depend on oil or oil-producing countries, they were already affected before the pandemic in terms of the crash of the oil prices, and that was due to lower oil demand. We are seeing that almost a few years ago, when the oil price dropped as low as $30 per barrel, it has recovered. As of today, I was seeing that almost 80 plus dollars. This would help these countries not only to increase their revenue, but spending those resources probably in a more balanced and effective way. But obviously, when the oil prices go up, it helped these countries. There are other countries who had experienced lower oil prices. Now they are going to experience higher oil prices, and that will have impact on them. But particularly for this part of the world, especially in GCC and other oil-producing countries, the recovery of oil prices might not be a long-term scenario, because we know that the world is moving and moving very fast to renewable energy resources. There are many Western countries now, they have a very ambitious but aggressive goal that they want to reduce their dependence on non-renewable fuels, uh, cut to 50%, 30%, or even 0%. So whether they would be able to realize that or not, but these are actually in the positive direction for the planet. But that will have significant impact on the oil producing countries in the long run. The good thing is that most of these countries realize that things are changing and they are taking the steps to somehow cope with these upcoming challenges. We are also seeing in this part of the world, as well as in many other parts affected by the pandemic, that they are evaluating and prioritizing relevant sectors. Even when we are coming from this pandemic and recovering, not every sector could be open in the same way. That requires some health guidance and health regulations, and we're seeing that that prioritization has taken place, and that has been a good thing. Enacting strict and inclusive workforce protocols, that also is very important because sometimes different sectors actually have different kind of health risks, and they have to be also dealt with in such a way so that the kind of sectors that require stricter regulation and the kind of sectors that require not as stricter protocols, those also should be duly looked at. And in some cases, we are finding that the safety regimes in place is somewhat producing good result. The robust and inclusive testing and tracing, as well as universal vaccination, definitely has been a positive thing. This is not something where you can differentiate between the residents and the citizens, the migrant labor compared to the other people in a country. So a practical thing should have been that it should be universal vaccination, and all of these countries have actually taken that position, and that has been the approach, and I think it is producing good results. The other important thing would be is that how to earn the trust and confidence of the population. And I think that our people generally are trusting of our government leadership and the kind of responsible steps they are taking. This has to continue so that people know that as far as the issues are concerned, they are being transparently being presented to the people, and the policies and measures that are being taken are actually keeping the interest and the welfare of people. I think that also needs to be a continuing thing. In the long run, however, the kind of things that would be important for us to realize and to take note of is that the kind of this pandemic, of course, is a health related or health triggered pandemic, but there are other crises that we see that we need to recognize the common factors that contribute to business cycle, and there should be no reason. It is unconscionable that the same kind of factors that lead to crisis after crisis, and we actually keep doing business in the post-crisis period as business as usual. That should not be. This also requires that we do have significant disparity in terms of the access to income and wealth, and that is why we do need to look at that how we have embraced the notion of shared prosperity. A prosperity is not a true prosperity if it is limited to only some people, only to some countries. And in that regard, we all have, not just the people who are poor and who are not so advanced, that they should be thinking about it. Given the vulnerability that we have seen due to pandemic, it is important that everybody, including the rich and the powerful and the wealthy, that they also think that it is in their interest as well that the prosperity is duly shared. We are also seeing some tendency in this part of the world where the nationalization of the labor force, although it is primarily in the right direction, but sometimes if we want to put too much emphasis on the citizens rather than the residents, sometimes we can move too quickly, and there could be an imbalance in the composition of the skilled labor and unskilled labors that we have. So although the nationalization move is in the right direction, but unless we can create the relevant work culture, as well as the pool of skills and the expertise which is a must, again, this can have some impact in the long run. And also, as I have already mentioned, that in this part of the world, dependence on oil revenue needs to be gradually but sooner than later reduced. And it is also encouraging that most of these countries are trying to come up with ways to mitigate the challenges they might be facing. We wish that these things were taken into consideration earlier, but somehow we forgot that these oils were not forever. And rest of the world, as they reduce their demand, it will have impact in this part of the world. But also in this part of the world, from economic side, what we see is not moving in that direction, is to build a production-oriented industrial economy that serves both the domestic market and create international demand. As we reduce the dependence on oil, or for some countries reduce on exporting migrant labor, we need to actually diversify our economy that orients toward production. And production, particularly in the way of serving the industrial economy. The countries that actually have developed, you will look at their pattern, and simply providing raw material or exporting raw material or resources that other countries will utilize and produce, that make other countries rich. And for our countries, we might be able to get some benefit because we export these resources, but we know the benefit of these exports are skewed within each of these countries. And in the long run, it does make us vulnerable to different kinds of crises that we face. The long-term resilience and sustained recovery will require that the fundamentals of economic growth remain solid. What are fundamentals of economic growth? Countries that actually want to grow and develop, their education has to be a high priority. Their health has to be a high priority. There are many things, including access to the basic needs, would have to be a high priority. And that's why it is not just restoring the previous level of income and wealth. When we talk about restoring wealth, we need to understand wealth both in terms of physical, human, natural, social, intangible, and financial capital, but with a key emphasis on physical, human, and natural capital. If we somehow do not invest in our planet in whatever way we can, if we cannot invest in our human resources, so that actually when we say that human resources are our most important asset, but actually in accounting we treat them as a liability, we need to change our mentality. But more importantly, we actually need to have an economic thinking or approach or perspective that I call human-centered. Right now, we don't care about human welfare of the large segment of global population. The decisions we take, the policies we make, the kind of things that we introduce and implement, we do not take into consideration vulnerable population, the people who are not already getting the benefit of the development and so on, but particularly because somehow human beings are just factors of production, just one factor of production. There are many factors, so human beings are also, particularly labor, is just another factor of production. This mentality actually makes us vulnerable further, that when times of crisis comes, basically we dispense with the people that we cannot take care of it anymore, our production cannot support them, so we can easily dispense them. We have to think in a way that we all are in the same boat. If CEOs actually have higher income, higher wealth during this pandemic, while people lost jobs, there should be something that is fundamentally wrong. Our ways of prosperity, our ways of gaining wealth should be that we all want to grow together, not at the expense of others. Without that human-centered economy and thinking, we are going to have, crisis is going to occur probably recurrent manner, but the vulnerability that we will have is not probably going to change fundamentally without somehow changing our perspective or modifying our perspective and approach. Well, that's what I wanted to just share some ideas with you. At the end, basically, my focus is that it is important that we recognize our interdependence. We recognize the responsibility of all of us that we can make a difference in terms of making this world a better place, making this planet and keeping this planet a habitable one. And crisis, whether we can actually prevent it in future, we can be probably better prepared once we recognize our interconnectedness, our interdependence, and if our perspective is a human-centered perspective. Thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu rahmatullah. Thank you very much, Prof, for your wonderful, informative, and insightful session. Let's welcome some questions or comments from our guest attendees. So I think you may raise your hand or you may write anything, any question or comment in the question and answer section so that our Prof may respond to you, inshallah. We see some of them already raise their hand.
I think they should just speak, unmute and speak.
Yes. Dr. Abdul Halim, Mr. Abdul Halim, welcome. Abdul Halim Yahyawi, are you with us? Please welcome. If you have any question.
Unmute it first, please.
I think he is not around. Okay. Ustad Nasir Mohammad. Ustad Nasir Mohammad, please welcome us.
Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Dr. Mohammad, thank you very much for the informative session. As a Muslim, I feel that we, during the pandemic, we are more of reactive than proactive. And we've been through some kind of a very difficult time, but we did not apply the rules and regulations of Islam according to the says of our Prophet Muhammad and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once I think of the importance of zakat and the usage of it, honestly, I did not see it through what's so-called the Islamic world. There are certain places in the Arab world or Muslim world who performed zakat and used it for the maximum for the profit of the society in general. But in the what's so-called the expanded way, I did not see it. The other thing is, if you see the role of the what's so-called awqaf and the return on investment on awqaf, we did not see it as Muslims. At the same time, if we are talking about the what's so-called the taxation system, I have seen it in Europe and United States, and maybe some parts of the Muslim world who advanced more than the others. But the reality is, we did not see the reflection of the tax on the wealth of the humans before and during and after the pandemic. In general, I think we are good talkers, big mouths. The reality is we are not that good doers, and we are not that good believers in what we believe in religion or in the ideas or thoughts that we have as human beings. Once I compare myself to the people in Europe and United States as an Arab or a Muslim, I feel that we are far behind those guys. I feel the usage of what's so-called the reflection of humanity or a humanitarian point of view has more to do in Europe, United States, Canada, and so on. But I did not see the same thing in the Arab or Muslim world. I need to hear from you more about this subject. What's going on in between Muslims and Arabs? You know, why aren't they practicing what they preach? Why we have the best, maybe one of the best religions in the world as the source of all religions, and we are not doing it right. So if you don't mind, I need your point of view about this subject. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nasir. Prof, yes, please.
Well, first of all, Jazakallah khair for raising these questions. Actually, these are kind of things that require a much fuller treatment on their own. Just to give you some example, when we talk about zakah, we have been paying zakah for centuries and millennia, but we have not been effectively utilizing zakah to the extent that poverty is still part of a permanent feature of our societies. And I'll just briefly mention, because this does require a longer explanation and presentation on this. There is another paper that I have written that is called The Challenge of Poverty and the Poverty of Islamic Economics. And I invite you to read that if you can get access to it. And one of the things that is pointed out, that there are people who are paying zakah in the Muslim world. But the reason it is not effective is because it is not a problem-solving oriented. The people who want to pay zakah, they just give zakah and then they think that their responsibility is fulfilled. They have done their ibadah. Where did the zakah money go? What impact it had? There is no benchmark, there is no KPI, there is no monitoring that, well, based on this year's zakah, we brought 10 people out of poverty last year or last 5 years or something. The community does not target that these are 20 people that we need to help them to have long-term impact on their life. We're not that kind of problem-solving oriented. So zakah is being given, zakah is being paid, zakah is being distributed, but it is not producing the kind of result that we see. Second, awqaf, this is quite interesting. Awqaf has been one of the very important features of our Islamic civilization. Unfortunately, the way it has evolved, again, has become quite dysfunctional. If you look at the endowment, which is equivalent to awqaf in the Western world, they use it for primarily education, research, and health. Our awqaf is primarily for building mosques and madrasas and orphanage. And again, it does not produce the kind of impact in the society that it is supposed to. Again, we need to look at those things, that those tools are available to us, but we are not taking the proper benefit of it. Again, it requires a change of mindset. The last of the points that you talk about, a lot of things that are better in certain parts of the world than in the Muslim world. Again, we need to go back to our teachings of Islam. When I talked about the human-centered economy, when Quran says, "Kuntum khaira ummatin ukhrijat linnas," linnas, not lil Muslimin, not for the Muslims. It is actually for the humanity. Indeed, Quran ends with so many times emphasizing this word. The last surah of the Quran is Surah An-Nas. And how many times the word Nas is repeated there? And Nas is not actually our main concern. So if everybody becomes self-centered, if they focus only on themselves, their joys are not shared by others, their sorrows and sufferings are not shared by others, well, what we can say about others? But we believe in a religion that teaches us to have what I call humanity orientation. So when we have lost that humanity orientation, now we cannot even take care of ourselves. We have become disoriented. So some of these things that we are talking about here requires a reorientation of our thinking. And I prefer to not use the term just rules and regulations, because humanity orientation is not a matter of rules and regulations. It is more of a value, a set of norms, a set of principles that we get from the Quran. Then we have to come up with rules and regulations that reflect that. Unfortunately, we have lost on the field of values and principles. We need to regain that. Once again, these require more elaborate discussion, and hopefully, inshallah, the association will take steps to have further topics in this regard, and we will be then be able to benefit from it.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your clarification. And I think there is no more question or comment from participants. So, inshallah, Prof, in future, we are going to have more sessions with you. And before
just one point is that in this slide, you will see that SSRN archive, many of my writings are already archived there. Those of you who are interested, you can visit the archives and take a look at it. And feel free to share my comment. I am a learner more than a teacher, and I am also in my path of learning. So by mutually engaging, inshallah, we can help each other grow.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. And I would like to just inform our participants that we are going to conduct a training program in Islamic Banking and Finance in next month, November 20 and 21. So we are going to announce the program, training program, inshallah, very soon. So you may register to join the training program, and you may also invite your friends, your colleagues to join the workshop. So on behalf of Islamic Economics Association, I would like to thank our guest speaker today, Dr. Mohammad Omar Farooq, for your time, effort, and for your wonderful presentation today. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you, to reward you in dunya and hereafter, inshallah. We also thank our Director General, Dr. Ala Al-Ubaid, who joined the session as well. And we thank all the people in the association for their efforts, for their hard work, for the association, and to serve the Islam and Muslims and humanity, human being. So, and we thank our participants and attendees from around the world who join us today as well and every time. So we thank you very much for your participation, and we'll see you again very soon. So the last words and concluding words from our Professor Dr. Omar.
No, I just, one of the things that I want to just point out is that there are some key values and principles that we need to focus on. There are not too many, but there are few. Once we embrace that, our brain would be rewired in a different way. Right now, the kind of things we spend our emotions on, our time on, our resources on, that requires a reorientation. So think about it in the Quran in a way that actually change our thinking. And that would be, I think, important. And another book that also actually deals with this issue is Toward Our Reformation. And you will find information about that at my sites as well. And I encourage you to read the book and share your thoughts. And I think you would find it thought-provoking and enlightening, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah, bro. Thank you very much again. With that, we conclude today's session here. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.